Booktube, Sarah here, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm coming to you with my 2019 year-end stats and 5-star reads. So, I did not do a December wrap-up. Originally I had planned on doing my December wrap-up on New Year's Day. And then instead I decided to do the New Year's Eve vlog. I think that was a little bit more fun. And then to do my December wrap-up and then to also do a year-end wrap-up seemed like a bit of overkill for me. And I don't think I just did a December wrap-up in 2018 either. So, this might be the norm going forward that, instead of doing a December wrap-up, I just kind of do the year-end. The year-end is fun. I am doing exactly how I normally do my month-end ones with all of the different categories, all the different stats I like looking at. So I went through my spreadsheet from last year, or from 2019. It feels so weird to say that that was last year, doesn't it, you guys? Even though we're like 5 days into the new year. But I went through all my stats, and I've got them all written down here on my tablet. And yeah, I thought I'd share them all with you guys, along with all the books that I rated 5 stars in 2019. So let's jump in and get started. First off, I read a grand total of 325 books in 2019. I met my Goodreads goal. My Goodreads goal last year changed quite a bit. It was higher, and then I lowered it, and then I put it back up again, and then I lowered it again, and it was all over the map. This year I am at 300, and I'm keeping it. It's locked at 300 regardless. If I read 390 books this year, I'm still leaving at 300. 300 is the goal I'd like to hit, and I think I can do that. But yeah, I mean, who knows what's going to happen as the year progresses on. I could end up reading a lot more, a lot less. It all depends, but 300 is where I'm going to stay for 2020. So into my star ratings for the year. 2 1.5-star books, 2 2-star books, 5 2.5-star books, 53 3-star books, 106 3.5-star books, 119 4-star books, 24 4.5-star books. Here's the shocking one, you guys. 14 5-star reads. That's it. You guys know I do not throw around 5-star reviews lightly. 14 of them, and that's one more than 2018. I think I had 13 in 2018. So yeah, that's not too shabby. But that to me seems reasonable. A book really has to wow me to give it 5 stars. And 14 of them did this year, so that's pretty good. But that's not to say that I had a bad reading year, because I didn't. Oh, you only read 14 5-star books. Yeah, but I read 24 4.5-star books and 119 4-star books. 3 stars an average rating. If I give a book 3 stars, I enjoyed it. I might have had a couple problems with it, but I enjoyed it. So, underneath that, there were only 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 books that I didn't enjoy. That's pretty good if you look at the stat that way. I don't know why I'm justifying to you guys. You understand. This was fun. The genres that I read this year, you guys. I put all the rest of the stats go in order from most to least. I read 156 contemporary romances in 2019. Nobody is surprised by that stat at all. But that was 48% of what I read was contemporary romance. Which, A, yeah, that's a big number. But B, that means only half of what I read was actually contemporary romance, which is kind of what I'm known for. But it was only half of my reading for last year. Everything else was a wide range of genres. And I think that's fantastic. I think it's absolutely fantastic. It made me so happy to see that. So, coming in a second underneath that, 34 historical romances. And then underneath that, 24 middle grade. That was my rereads of the Babysitters Club last year. 23 romantic suspense. Now, I had a viewer ask me just the other day, they posed a question saying, which was my favorite subgenre of romance? Contemporary, or not contemporary, historical or romantic suspense? And I said, it depends on how I feel. It really depends on my mood, whether I'm in the mood for historical, in the mood. If you ask me to pick one, I don't think I could. I like both of them equally. And this kind of shows that here, 34 historical and 23 romantic suspense. There's not that big of a gap between the two. 21 cozy mysteries, you guys. I love me a good cozy mystery. 11 paranormal romance. That surprised me. That really surprised me, to be honest. 8 thrillers. Thrillers are something I really started delving into late in 2019, and I want to read all of them now because I love them. 8 historical fiction novels. I love historical fiction. You guys know that. And yeah, so I had some really good ones this year. 7 chick lit novels. And of course, I define chick lit and women's fiction are two different things. Chick lit is more of a romantic comedy. Women's fiction is women's fiction. I'm not a fan of either genre classification, but I just didn't know where else to put them. 7, inspirational romantic suspense. So going back to that romantic suspense versus historical argument, that now add another 7 to that 23. Now we're up to 30, right? So it is pretty much an even split between the two. 6 nonfiction books in 2019. That is awesome. And not all of them were in Nonfiction November. I read 4 classics last year, and I'm trying to remember which ones they were. I know I read Pride and Prejudice. I know I read Jane Eyre. I didn't reread Gone with the Wind last year. I can't remember what the other 2 were. I'll have to look at my list because I'm curious now. But I know Pride and Prejudice and Jane Eyre. Oh, I read Emma. I also read Emma. I can't remember the last one. I'll have to look it up. I'll look it up and I'll put it right here, just in case you guys are curious. I read 3 graphic novels. They were all part of the Giant Days series, which I absolutely adore. 2 Amish romances, because why not? And that even seems strange to me because we did Amish in April, but I only read 2 Amish romances, but I'm pretty sure that some of those inspirational romantic suspense came from some Amish books. So I'm going to do better in 2020 and labeling it, if it's an Amish romantic suspense, I will label it as such. So it's easier for me to look back later on, because sometimes I look at these and go, really? Where did that come from? I read 2 women's fiction, 2 inspirational romances, so like the love-inspired ones. 2 mysteries, only 2 that were actually considered to be like a mystery, not a cozy mystery, not a thriller, but a mystery. Again, it's like a gray area. It depends on how you want to classify it, I guess. 1 YA romance, or 1 YA contemporary, however you want to list it. 1 erotic novel. Well, there you go. 1 steampunk. I know that one I read for the Romanceopoly last year. 1 science fiction. I wrote that down. I'm like, really? I read a science fiction book? I don't read science fiction. So I did a search on my spreadsheet and I found it. And in case you guys are curious, the book is The Truth Is Out There, edited by Jonathan Mayberry. This is, if you are a fan of the X-Files, this is an anthology. This is the 2nd anthology. There are 2 of them. The first one is called Trust No One. And it is written by different authors, and all the stories take place within the X-Files universe. They're delightful, especially if you're an X-Files fan. And I am a big X-Files fan. And 1 fantasy novel. Again, I don't really read fantasy, but I read a fantasy novel, and that was one that I read in December that I talked about in a previous video, one of my weekly wrap-ups, and it was The Afterlife of Holly Chase, which is labeled as a fantasy novel, and I really enjoyed it. So that is all the genres. Now I have listed here, and I do like to keep track of these, all of the Harlequin imprints and how many of each different one that I read in a given year, or in a given month or whatever, that I do talk about these month to month, but to give an overall snapshot for the year is kind of fun. So first of all, we had 16 special edition novels. No surprise if you guys look directly behind me, these are all special edition. They are by far my favorite. I love them to pieces. They are like the home and family stories. So yeah, no surprise that one took top of the list. 9 intrigue novels up here. I love the intrigues. Now, a lot of these came, of course, from my 40 Years of Harlequin book project. I read 8, excuse me guys, I read 8 historical novels, 7 from the Desire line, 7 from the romantic suspense line, which is the same idea as the intrigues. They're hiding back behind here. You can see that purple book behind my reading journal. Where was I? 6 Harlequin romances, 6 super romances, 6 love-inspired suspense, no surprise there, 4 of the Blaze novels, which I absolutely love, and I miss that series so much, 3 of the Temptation novels, which ended before the Blaze series, or right around the time the Blaze series started, so Blaze took over for Temptation, 3 Western romances, or as they used to be called, the American romance line, 2 Silhouette romances before Harlequin and Silhouette merged. Silhouette and Harlequin each had their own romance lines, so I read 2 of those. 2 Harlequin duets novels, which I absolutely love. 1 Dare novel, which was I read that for a challenge. I DNF'd a Dare book as well this year, because I realized I read the first one and it was okay. I read the second one. I started to have problems with it and I ended up DNFing it. I've decided that is an imprint that's not for me. They're erotic. They're not my favorite thing. I have no problem reading adult content in books, but I don't like it when it gets pushed, when the envelope gets pushed that much. That's my own personal preference. Everybody has their own. You do you. If you love those ones, awesome, because there are some great authors that write for them and some great stories. They're not for me. One Harlequin heartwarming novel, one Love and Laughter novel, which is an imprint that's no longer published, but it's a romantic comedy. One Love Inspired, one Silhouette Bombshell, that's now a defunct series as well, which dealt with like women assassins and like all these really cool things. I missed that series. It was also a great series. And one Harlequin Presents novel. So out of all of the books that I read this year as well, 284 of them were geared towards an adult audience. Fantastic. 24 were middle grade, 10 were YA, and 7 of them were new adult. That's pretty cool. For publication date, 3 books were published before the 1920s, 2 were published in the 1930s, 1 in the 1960s, 1 in the 70s, 18 from the 1980s, 29 from the 1990s, 38 from the 2000s, 134 books that were published between 2010 and 2018, by far my highest time grouping, and 99 books published in 2019. 30% of what I read were new releases. That I thought it was a lot higher than that. And I think that's because towards the tail end of the year, I was reading a lot more new releases, ARC copies, things like that. So it felt like that number should have been higher for me, because when I would do my weekly reviews, more than half of the books would be e-ARCs or new releases. And I thought that it was less of a split. But if it's 30%, I'm fine with that stat. 30% new releases to 70% backlist, that's fantastic in my opinion. So for the books that I like, the format in which I read them in, 140 books were audiobooks. That was 43% of the amount of books that I read came from audiobooks. That number in 2020 is going to drop. Not because I don't love audiobooks, you guys know. I'm a big fan of audiobooks. I praise them. I think they're great. But what I'm finding is that on my TBRs before, it used to be like, let's say I would read 25 books in a month. 13 or 14 of those books would be audiobooks. And I just find that the time that I now listen to audiobooks has changed. I enjoy sitting here in the mornings and having my coffee and doing my knitting and listening to an audiobook. I enjoy listening to an audiobook in the car on my way to work. But I cannot listen to audiobooks at work because of the nature of my job. And I find on my way home, I want to listen to podcasts because there are a handful of podcasts that I absolutely love. And then on the weekends too, if I'm sitting here for an hour or two in the morning, I'll listen to an audiobook. But I don't find that it's my go-to. I know a lot of people do it while they're cleaning or while they're cooking dinner or while they're doing things like that. I don't tend to do that. I tend to put on music. It works better for me. So I predict that number is going to drop in 2020. For my January TBR, there were, I think originally I said 6, it's now dropped to actually only 4 books that are audiobooks on my January TBR. 4 out of 27. That's huge. Like for me, that's huge. I do not ever want to not have an audiobook on the go because I always love having one on the go. For my drives into work, for sitting here in the morning, there are certain times when I love an audiobook. But the bulk of my reading is probably going to be e-copy or print book. So anyway, just a little slight caveat, not that it matters, but that's just thought I'd share with you guys. 123 were ebooks. That's pretty good. 52 were mass market paperbacks. Those were probably all my 40 years of Harlequin Project books. 4 books were on hardcover, and 4 books were trade paperbacks. So really, I had more physical reading as opposed to audio reading in 2019, but the split was almost 50-50. It was very, very close to 50-50. It will not be that this year. I almost guarantee it. For all the books that I read, 318 were novels, were full-length novels. 6 were novellas, and I read 1 anthology. 200, the series. You guys know I love me a good series. 228 books that I read this year were part of a series. 97 were standalone. That's not too bad. Of those 228 books that were part of a series, 71 were brand new series that I started in 2019. That I'm not a fan of that stat. That number needs to be way lower. 153 were part of ongoing series. That's not too shabby. 3 series I completed. That number needs to be way higher. And 1 series I did DNF and decided I'm not continuing on with the series. Grand total. A part of me wishes that I had kept track of this number going forward, because I am like 577 pages short of hitting a huge number. I read a grand total of 99,423 pages. I am now keeping track of that number going forward so I can see that number. So I can see if I'm going to hit a huge milestone. And if I'm going to come close in December to hitting 100,000 pages, you know your girl is going to be trying to read as many graphic novels as possible in order to push myself over the edge. Or maybe just say, hey, in December, I'm going to listen to Gone with the Wind because it's 1,000 pages. But yeah, I came that close. 507, what did I say? 577? I don't know if I did the math right in my head. If I did, good for me, because I'm horrible at math. But to be that close, but yet that far away, I think if I had actually gotten around to reading How the Duke Stole Christmas and the Hanukkah book, I would have probably passed over the 100,000 page mark. But it is what it is. We're not going to beat ourselves up over it. I read almost 100,000 pages last year, you guys. That blows my mind. Absolutely blows my mind. So let's get into the 14 books that I rated 5 stars in 2019. I am so thrilled when I was looking at this list how different all these books are. Now, one of my earlier stats was that I think it was like 40 some odd % of what I read was contemporary romance. For my 5-star reads for the year, I only had 3 out of the 14 books were contemporary romance. The rest were all over the map. Now, saying that, I think 5-star reads are very subjective. And I know everybody else would say the exact same thing. You know, what I would rate as 5 stars, somebody else would be like, nah, it wasn't that great. But it also depends on when you read it and where you were in your life. If I was to go back, let's say in a year from now, and read any of these books, would I still necessarily give them 5 stars? Maybe, maybe not. There are, I think, 4 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 of them for sure would get 5 stars because those 4 were actually rereads. And the first time I read them, they also got 5 stars. So, you know, yeah, they would probably get it again if I read them again. One of them I've read, I think this was my 4th or 5th reread through it. So, and it always gets 5 stars because I love it that much. But the other ones, you know, if I picked it up a year from now, would I still give it 5 stars? Because it depends on where you are in your life, where you are in your reading life. I think all those things factor in. But these are the books that I loved enough to give 5 stars to in 2020. So let me share them with you guys. This is in no particular order. I didn't rate them from like least favorite to most favorite of the 5 stars. This is in the order that I read them in. So yeah, first off, in January, I read Chasing Perfect by Susan Mallory. Contemporary romance novel, the first book in the Fool's Gold series. This was a reread for me. I think this is the 3rd time I've read this book. Every time I read it, I love it. I think it's mostly because it's the start to the series. It's a standard contemporary romance novel. There's nothing extraordinary, fantastic about it. But I think it's because it's the start to such a series that I love ever so much that it holds a special place in my heart and gets a 5-star rating from me. Read in February, another reread. Made in America by Bill Bryson. This is the history of the English language in the United States. This is a nonfiction novel. I listened to this one on audio. Again, it's a reread. I loved it. This book is absolutely delightful. If you like language, you need to read this book. It's with Bill Bryson's trademark wit and humor. And, you know, it's really neat on how language evolved from the first settlers coming over from Europe. And, you know, how the different dialects and how the different languages like German or French or what have you became English. Now, of course, it's for the US and I am in Canada, so it's a little bit different from me. But even how the different dialects and different regions of the US evolved. And it's fascinating. I really, really loved it. It's not a dry book. Like I said, very witty, a lot of great humor in it, highly enjoyable. I want to reread it again. I can absolutely see it being one of those books that I reread every year. Maybe I will reread it again in 2020 for Nonfiction November, because I think that would be a lot of fun. The next one. There's Something About Sweety by Sandia Manon. I always hope I say her name right. I read this one in April, so I had no 5-star reads in March. This is a YA contemporary novel about a girl named Sweety who is a little bit overweight, and I shouldn't say that. Her parents think she's a little bit overweight, and especially her mother loves to kind of harp on her about that, and should you be eating that, and should you be doing that, and they want to set her up with this boy, but they want to set her up with a different boy, but she's fallen for this other boy, and they don't think that she is actually, not that she's not good enough, but that she would embarrass herself with this very affluent young man from a good Indian family. It was a delightful story. I really, really loved it. This is the author who wrote When Dimple Met Rishi, which I read in 2018, and I love that one too. She is fast becoming a favorite author of mine. I love her work. I've read pretty much, I think, everything by her so far, and I highly recommend this one. Also in April, I read The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek by Kim Michelle Richardson. This was a historical fiction novel about women who ran the library in small town Kentucky, in the mountains of Kentucky. And they would take books to people who lived in the hills, and people who wouldn't venture into town, people who didn't, who wouldn't have necessarily gotten to a library. And it was really delightful. If you like historical fiction, this one I think was set in the 30s. Excuse me. Very, very interesting period of time. Highly recommend it. The Mistress by Susan Wiggs, I read in May. This is a historical romance novel. It takes place, this is the second book in a trilogy. The first one is The Hostage. The final book is called The Firebrand, which I haven't read yet. I need to read it this year, so I can finish off this trilogy. And it takes place, the entire trilogy takes place in the aftermath of the Great Chicago Fire in 1871. And how 3 friends during the fire at the very beginning of the book get separated, and what happens to each one of them in their stories. And they're delightful, great history, especially if you're interested in reading a historical romance set outside of the Regency period, the typical historical Regency period. This one's set, of course, in America, in Chicago. Absolutely fantastic. Next up, The Honeymooners by Christina Lauren, that I read in July. So I had no 5-star read in June. The Honeymooners, probably, if you twisted my arm and asked me to rate these in order, The Honeymooners would probably be my favorite book of the year. I loved this book so much. Where is it? Do I have it here handy? Right here. Sorry. That's not it. You can stay right there. There it is. Yep, hands down. I listened to it on audio, but I actually bought a physical copy. I love this book. Absolutely fantastic. The thing that I love so much about this book, well, it is a contemporary romance. This is a book that I would feel absolutely comfortable handing to anyone. Anyone, regardless of how steamy you like your romance. I've encouraged my mother to read this one. She wants to borrow it next when she's done the book that she's currently reading. This would be a book I would feel absolutely comfortable, if my grandmother was still alive, to hand it to her to read. Do you know what I mean? This is the story about 2 people who it's an enemies to lovers story, and he's the best man and she's the maid of honor at their respective siblings are getting married to each other. So like her sister is marrying his brother, and then everybody at the wedding gets really sick after eating bad shellfish. And these 2 end up, Olive and Ethan, it's Olive and Ethan, end up taking the honeymoon for their siblings. So they have no relation. I mean, they are brother and sister-in-law, or they would be now, but there's no blood relation. And a romance ensues between the 2 of them. There is allusion to adult content, and you get a little bit of, a love scene, but then the door gets closed and everything happens behind closed doors, which is why I would feel comfortable handing this to just about anybody. Yeah, you're gonna get just a little something, but you can flip or skip that paragraph and continue on with the story. It's not overtly graphic. It is hysterically funny. The characters are wonderful, absolutely wonderful. This, I know, was up for one of the Goodreads Choice Awards. I don't think it won, and I don't know why. What book won? Red, White, and Blue? Red, White, and Royal Blue or something? I've never read it. I've heard mixed things about this. In my opinion, this one should have won hands down. It was absolutely fantastic, and I highly recommend that you guys read it if you haven't. I know everybody and his brother has read it, but again, if you twisted my arm and asked me to rate my very favorite book of the year, this one would definitely be it. And next up, also finished in July, Giant Days Volume 1. This was by John Allison, Lisa Treeman, and Whitney Koger. This is a graphic novel. This one was recommended by Karen over at Rather Be Reading. I'm so glad I picked up this series. It's a delight. It's about 3 friends, Daisy, Esther, and Susan, who are in uni in the UK and their trials and tribulations of university life. It's a delightful, delightful graphic novel series, and I highly recommend anybody pick it up. Next up, coming like that I read in August, One Night Gone by Tara Lakowski. Tara Lakowski. This was a fantastic thriller. Great, great thriller. I did not expect to like this one as much as I did. Super atmospheric about a woman who decides to house sit in this small town that is more like a beach community, that they're like a summer town where, you know, they get this influx of people during the summer months, but in the winter months it very much quiets down, and it's about her investigating this decades-old murder. Unbelievable. Highly recommend it. If you like thrillers, read this book. Also in August, I read Outlander by Diana Gabaldon for I think the 5th or 6th time. 5-star read. I don't really need to say much about that one. It is an absolute favorite. I'm sure everybody is familiar with it. I love it. I love it. I love it. If for some reason you have not read it yet, do yourself a favor and read it. And if you haven't read it yet and you love audiobooks, listen to it on audio, because as good as this book is, this book on audio is the cherry on the top of the ice cream, in my opinion. Fabulous. Davina Porter is one of the best narrators I have ever heard, and she does a bang-up job on this one. In October, so I had no 5-star reads in September. In October, I read Life and Other Inconveniences by the great Kristen Higgins. I am such a huge fan of Kristen Higgins. I love pretty much everything that she writes, but this one was delightful. This is not a straight contemporary, like a strict contemporary romance. This is definitely more a women's fiction novel about a woman re-navigating her life. And when she was a teenager, she got pregnant and was kicked out of her house by her grandmother. And now her grandmother needs her. Her grandmother's ill. So her and her now teenage daughter go back to stay with the grandmother for the summer to help her. And the story goes from there. Great story about family and second chances and redemption. And I loved it. My mother read it and she loved it as well. On my recommendation, she read it. But yeah, I absolutely recommend this one for sure. And the cover is utterly delightful on this one. Next up, another reread that I read in November, Furiously Happy by Jenny Lawson. This is one that I read for Nonfiction November. This is a memoir, and it's by Jenny Lawson, as I said. She is known as the Bloggess online. If you don't follow her blog, follow her blog. It is absolutely hysterical. She has such a great sense of humor. She has actually started, I saw it on Instagram, she started a book club because she's actually opening a bookstore in her hometown. The Nowhereville bookstore or something like that. And she's actually starting a book club. And she had this like Q&A section. And in the Q&A section, you know, she was writing fictional questions that people would write. And, you know, it's about the book club and how she will mail you out the book and then they're going to have a discussion on it in this Facebook group that you need to be invited to join. And the fake question was, oh, I have too many books in my house, or I own too many books already, or something like that. And her answer was, I understand the words, but not in the order that you wrote them in. I mean, her blog is delightfully funny. Now, she suffers from several different mental illnesses, and that's essentially what this book is about, is her dealing with those mental illnesses and how she goes about her day-to-day life. And, you know, stuff with her husband, Victor, her daughter. Throughout the book, there's this great kind of running gag about fight number 492 that I had with Victor. And then what the fight was about. It's hysterically funny. I absolutely recommend it. And it's a delight on audio because she narrates it herself, which is super extra fun. In December, guys, the last 3 books, all I read in December. So I had 3 5-star reads in December. The first one was Wrapped Up in You by Jill Shalvis. This was a contemporary romance novel. Book number 7 or 8 in the Heartbreaker Bay series. Takes place at Christmas time about a woman who runs a taco truck and a guy who is on vacation in San Francisco and the relationship they have and dealing with their families. And it was an utter delight. Probably my favorite book in the Heartbreaker Bay series, and I loved all the books in the Heartbreaker Bay series. So for me to say this is my favorite, all the other books have run in a very, very close second. Next one, We Met in December by Rosie Curtis. I'm like, please tell me I wrote down the author's name. This one was a lot of fun. This was a chick lit novel. It is about two people who meet both boarding at the same house. A mutual friend of both of them owns this home, and she's renting out rooms, and they both rent out rooms in this home for a year. And it essentially goes through their relationship over the course of an entire year, from December to the following December. And it's delightful. There is no adult content in this one, in the physical nature, if you will. There's drinking and things like that. This one also takes place in the UK. I listened to this one on audio, and it was a delight. Both narrators are fantastic, and I highly recommend this one. And last but not least, and the reason why I don't put out a year-end list prior to the end of the year, is I finished this book at 11:30 p.m. on New Year's Eve. And if I had put out a best of book list prior to that time, this book wouldn't have made that list because I hadn't finished it yet. And that was Good Girls Lie by J.T. Ellison. I just finished this one, like I said, on New Year's Eve. I just reviewed it in my weekly reviews for this week that just passed, so I'm not going to get into it again. It is a thriller set in a girls' boarding school, and it was amazing. Absolutely amazing. And I highly recommend that you go ahead and read it if you are a fan of thrillers. And if you want to know more, just go ahead and check out my weekly reviews video from earlier this week. So anyway, guys, I just noticed the time. This was a much longer video. I do apologize. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. I know there's kind of a lot in this video, mostly stats, but I like stats. I know they're not for everybody, but I do hope that the 5-star reads were something that you can look at yourself and see if there's anything there that you'd want to check out. And yeah, until my next video, everybody, take care and happy reading. Thank you all so much for watching. Bye, guys.